I'm Mindy Wyke, and this is Work in Progress. It's a podcast where we will be talking all about human development in tech. In the tech world, WIP stands for Work in Progress. It's often used for pull requests, merge requests, and sometimes even technical documentation that is still in draft mode. It's not quite finished yet. And let's be real, we are not quite finished. Humans are always in draft mode. This podcast is about the real, the messy, the human side of working in tech. I'll be talking with engineers, but also designers, product folks, customer support, coaches, and people from all over the tech world about what they are learning about, struggling with, building, and becoming. But ultimately, we are not here to showcase perfection. We're here to normalize growth, share stories, and remind each other that being a work in progress is exactly where we are supposed to be. So let's commit to curiosity and jump into it. Hello and welcome back to the Work in Progress podcast. With me today, I have Kim Maida, and she is, I don't remember your exact title, but DevRel at FusionAuth. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Kim Maida, as Mindy said. I am the Senior Director of Developer Relations at FusionAuth. I am a developer by trade, but I had transitioned into developer relations and DevRel leadership because I really enjoy teaching people.
So yeah, what do you like the most about teaching people so far? Or what have you enjoyed the most in teaching people?
Well, it's kind of funny because when I was in college, I actually went to college for animal behavior neurobiology. And one of the reasons I kind of transitioned away from that was because the future, the career path really that's laid out for that type of work is that generally you would become a college professor and then get grants and do your research over the summer and then teach during the rest of the year. And at the time I thought, well, I really don't want to teach. so I'm going to go somewhere else with my career path. And the kind of irony later was that I serendipitously had an opportunity to speak at a conference. And I realized after doing that it was incredibly gratifying to teach people and to share knowledge and then to be able to talk to them about, what are their questions? Do they have hard questions that I can't answer? Going through that kind of made me realize, oh, I actually do really like to teach. And it's funny looking back at it now because I probably would have really enjoyed being a college professor. But I'm also very happy with the path that I chose.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how that works out. I don't like this. Wait, I do. Well, cool. So I know you and I spoke previously, we've met before. We had a little chat, but I think one of the things that I remember asking is what is DevRel? Is it marketing? Is it engineering? Because I think every company, of course, handles it a little bit differently, but I think it can be a little bit vague what it actually is. Would you mind sharing just your perspective of what DevRel actually is?
Yeah. So I believe that DevRel, kind of from a drier perspective, is composed of kind of 4 pillar disciplines. One being evangelism. A lot of, companies hire people in DevRel and then they put them in the marketing department so that they can go out and talk about the product. Another aspect, though, being advocacy, which is representing the interests of the customer to the company in order to create a better product that serves customers' needs as well as it possibly can. And being the people who can go and solicit that kind of feedback from the customers and or the developer community at large, including prospects, like people who don't use the technology yet. What are they looking for? What do they want? And how can we, fit into their workflow in a way that benefits them? And then there's community, of course. There's always a group of users for any product. And I like working with developer products, so that is typically developer users. And, it's communities are very interesting because they vary incredibly widely, depending on what the technology is and what kind of the needs behind the reasons why people are using the product differ dramatically. Some products are critical infrastructure. You need them in order to accomplish anything, in order to build an app. And then some things are, this is exciting technology. This is like hot new stuff. This is something that I'm really excited about and interested in. And the communities for these two different kind of sets of needs are very different. And the kind of last part of developer relations is the experience of the developers have when they are using the product. So developer experience that might include documentation, sample apps, demos. Is the interface easy to use when you're picking it up? How well can you learn it? How long does it take you to get to that aha moment? And providing a really good developer experience so that people can get to a viable working example of something that they want to do as quickly as possible is a big component of developer relations as well.
It's definitely a lot of that like educational aspect, kind of like you said, teaching people. Because like you could teach someone who has no idea about the product, like you said, people who like aren't using the technology now, but then you also can teach people who are pretty familiar but maybe aren't power users. I guess excuse me. I guess that actually leads me to another question. Like, is your goal to make everybody a power user, or is it more just to like, are you using it effectively? I guess is kind of the question.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest thing is, can you be successful?
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of people, especially for something like Auth, like they don't want to be a power user. Like they don't need to be a power user in order to be
Mm-hmm.
successful.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, it's something that they wish that they didn't really have to spend a ton of time on. Um, and interestingly enough, that's actually an area of DevRel I really enjoy being in, which seems kind of counterintuitive initially, but I've had jobs where I've worked for products that provide critical infrastructure like Auth. And then I've
Mm-hmm.
also had jobs where it's a framework or a technology that people really love. It's a very beloved thing in the community. The community is massive. Everybody's excited and they want to create demos and all of these different things. Um, and for me personally, I actually prefer doing DevRel for critical infrastructure because it's not necessarily something that people love and want to do all the time and play with in their spare time, but it's something that you absolutely have to have it. It absolutely
Mm-hmm.
has to be correct. And if it's not, really bad things can happen. And
Yeah.
being able to give developers the confidence that they've done that correctly and they've done that in a way that is going to, facilitate the product's success and the success of their users is something that I find really gratifying, especially when I can explain complex concepts in simple terms so that people don't feel like they need to go and read the entire OAuth 2 spec in order to implement authentication
Yeah.
or authorization.
It's a lot. Do you, have you read the entire OAuth 2.0? No, I'm just kidding. But like, I'm sure you have to do some research, but very few people need to read the entire spec, I'm sure.
I have read the entire spec,
Oh,
yes.
good. I didn't want to put you on the spot too much, but that's
Yeah, but
awesome.
I think the thing is people who are implementing shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah,
They probably shouldn't even have to read any of it. Like if as DevRel and as providers of these services, if we've done our job right, then most people don't need to become a power user, but they can be successful anyway.
yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, so in a side project that I work on, I've been using FusionAuth, and I started out being like, okay, I need to like understand what's going on here. So I tried to do a lot of not like a crazy deep dive because this is just sort of on my spare time, but like I was trying to figure out some of the basics. I was like, okay, this is getting a little much because the more you dive in, the more you're like, oh, I don't know about this, I don't know about that. But like it has been relatively easy compared to some of the other option. Like doing it myself would be crazy difficult, but using FusionAuth has been really nice. Just to like know that again, you guys are sort of handling the big scary hairy parts that I don't necessarily like want to dive into. But yeah, it's been really nice. I've been using the community version since this is sort of like a side project, but it's been really nice to, and actually I've had a lot of good luck. Like if I get stuck figuring out what's going on with like online sources. So it's been a pleasant experience so far. Just, a little bit of a learning curve for someone who doesn't know anything about Auth up to this point. So it's been good
Yeah.
though. It's been a good
No, that's
experience.
awesome, and I'm glad to hear that there are resources available. Like it's not perfect as far as like the things that we have available to provide to help people learn. We
Hmm.
can always do more than we have at the moment, and hearing though that what we have worked on so far is helpful is always gratifying.
Heck yeah. Well, especially I think one of the most interesting parts and like one of the reasons we went for it too, is that like we can host our own instance, which is really cool. So we're like hosting our own FusionAuth, which is just, I don't know, it just feels really nice to be able to sort of self-contain and know that it's just our little thing. Which I don't know if all auth providers do that, but it's a pretty cool option on my perspective. So
Yeah. Typically they don't. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons that I was excited to join FusionAuth,
hmm.
was because I've worked for Auth0 and I've worked for Okta, and those are SaaS providers. Like
Hmm.
unless you specifically go down like a sales route of I want to deploy on-prem, it's like this whole big thing.
Yeah.
And it's very, very expensive. But if you are just, implementing Auth, most people are on the cloud platform. And so in my history of working for and representing companies that provide auth solutions, I'd actually never worked for a company where you could just download the like authorization server and have it yourself on your own infrastructure. So that was exciting to me, because we had always kind of in the SaaS world viewed on-prem as like this big special thing that like really serious companies need. But actually you can just have it for free with FusionAuth, which was pretty exciting to me that's a thing we offer. Of course, like there's challenges in doing that too. If you're a SaaS provider and you want to roll out an update, you just tell everybody you're going to do it, and then you push it out over the air, and people get it, and then they have to deal with it.
Yeah.
But with something that's actually downloadable, we can release an update, and then people are responsible for going and grabbing that update themselves. So in a way, it's good because you have autonomy and control over your own instance. If there's critical things that you have that are going to be end up experiencing breaking changes if you upgrade, then you can upgrade on your own schedule and things like
Yeah.
that, where you maybe can't do that with a SaaS provider. But also it makes the divide between what we're able to do for people automatically and what they are going to have to do themselves to some degree.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting. We also do have a cloud platform, but personally, I really like the downloadable thing. So I've mostly, most of my work and experimentation has been with the downloadable one.
Yeah, it has been really cool. And I think we ended up using like a Docker instance, so or like the Docker image rather. So we are like doing all of our Docker stuff all at one, Docker Compose, doing all of it at once. But it's really cool because we sort of maintain it. But yeah, it's been really neat so far. Yeah. So I've obviously shared that I'm working on an app that includes FusionAuth. Is there something that you in particular are working on that like may or may not include FusionAuth?
Yeah, actually, I have been working on what I've been calling architecture-driven auth, where essentially there's a lot of different ways that you can architect an application, and then that impacts how you're going to implement auth in a pretty significant way.
Hmm.
If you have, a ton of external APIs that you have to call, then you probably don't want to be proxying all your API calls through a backend for front end. You might want to take a different approach too.
Yeah.
Um, so I've been working on putting together architecture demos basically for 3 different auth architectures. There is a draft in the IETF from the WebAuth working group, and they have basically 3 architectures that they recommend for different architectural scenarios based on, kind of what are your security requirements and what are the components of your architecture.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of share that level of architectural knowledge is something that's crucially important, like for not just for everybody out there, but also for our customers.
Mhm.
So our SEs will, receive questions about should I do backend for front end? How do I do that if I need to do that? What are the criteria that I would need to consider in order to know whether or not like this, that, or another architecture is going to work the best for me um, and my needs. So part of, my goals around putting together these architectural demos is enablement too, enablement for our SEs, and then as well as education for our customers and education for people out in the wild. And one of the things that I actually really like doing in identity in general is providing information that's useful to anybody who's using any provider.
Yeah.
So as much as I, do evangelism also and represent, a specific company, these architectural patterns are applicable to anybody using anything for auth. So you could be using Auth0, you could be using Keycloak, like you can do these things, and this is valuable knowledge no matter what. And that's kind of one of the things that in DevRel for me has been really important, is providing that knowledge that yes, I represent, a specific company, based on, my place of employment, and also I believe in the product, but also even if that's not what you're using, or for some reason you have to use something else, like your company has already decided on something, then I still want to enable people to have the knowledge to keep their users safe, essentially. Auth is a very high stakes area. So I'm not going to go out and tell people, oh, if you're not using FusionAuth, then you're insecure, because that's not true.
Yeah.
It's more that we have a product that provides certain features. Here's why these features are good. But if you're using any of these other products, if they're based on open standards, like a lot of this information is.
Well, it's always good to share that knowledge too. I mean, just because it helps the wider community. So it's and of course, they might come back and try to use FusionAuth later if they're not already. But generally, I think it just helps the industry, and I think it helps the community at large to have a better sense of what's going on. Because, as I mentioned earlier, like I thought that I had to do this like super deep dive to figure out what the heck was going on. And of course, it's nice to know what's actually happening to some degree. But we don't have to be, you know, like you said, like power users of a critical infrastructure piece. Um, so yeah, I appreciate that because it's just really helpful to share that knowledge so it doesn't seem so vague and like nebulous and like what is this scary thing. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, and there's a certain level of like how much of the black box do you really have to look at? This
Yeah.
was an interesting kind of conundrum for me working in DevRel. When I was at Auth0, I worked pretty closely with Vittorio Bertocci, who unfortunately has passed away, but he basically was the person who inspired me to go into identity like as a career from then on. He working with him kind of started to delineate. There's people who are experts in identity who are essentially like they kind of call themselves the identirati. Um, and they write the specs and they, know everything down to the last detail. And then there's people like me who bridge a gap between the folks who like are authoring the specs and coming up with, all of these best practices and the people who are actually implementing.
Hmm.
And I was always going back and forth, and I would go back and forth with Vittorio on this too, is like, how much do we want to tell people about what's inside the black box? Like, do you need to know how a JSON Web Token is validated and, like how the signature works. Do you need to know that in order to use JSON Web Tokens in your app for auth? Probably not, actually. Like
Right.
you can use a library for that, and
Mm-hmm.
there's not really a good reason for everybody to have to know that if they've implemented auth. But for me, it was always a struggle because it's the curse of knowledge, right? If you are deeply entrenched in a discipline and you know a lot about it, you have an urge to tell people all about it. And whether they actually need to know or not is something that I realized I had to really start thinking about that in a deeper way than I had before. Like for me personally, yes, I wanted to know exactly how, everything worked. But I thought back to, my time working as a software engineer at an agency, and we implemented Auth, and I knew almost nothing about it. And we
Yeah.
managed to do it. And it was just one of those things where I want to teach people enough so that they're confident that they've done it right, but they don't have to know every single little tiny detail. And um, the curse of knowledge is something that is prevalent in a lot of industries, but especially industries that are like super deep and can get very advanced. I think AI is like
Yeah.
another example of
Yeah.
this. Like all the people who use AI, even people who are, building apps and integrating agents and things like that, do they need to know exactly how like all of the LLMs and all the models work? They
Right.
probably don't. And there's, somewhere in the middle, there's an area where you decide like how deep you want to go. And so we want to be able to provide resources for the people who do want to go deep. And we also want to provide enough information that doesn't get too in the weeds to help people be successful if they just need to implement this and then move on to something else.
Yeah, that was gonna be one of my questions is like, how do you balance? Because I'm sure there are people out there who would like to know everything. So like, you want to put that out there too. Um, so do you, I guess, organize it differently so that people who are super curious can dive deeper versus someone who just needs to know top level can like quickly access those like quick and dirty types of things?
Yeah, it's interesting because I like to create things that can be consumed in a short amount of time.
Hmm.
So one of the things that I had started doing was like these little YouTube shorts, basically, that were like learn, about passwordless and passkeys in less than 90 seconds.
Yeah.
And I do my very best to explain things in as straightforward of a way as possible so that somebody can walk away after 90 seconds and be like, oh, okay, like I kind of get that. Um, and having consumable content that is bite-sized like that, I think has always been one of the important things for me in my learning. Like if somebody can explain something in as few words as possible, then that will stick with me and it'll stay with me a lot longer than if I sit and listen to someone talk for 2 hours about something. Um, and of course, we do both. So we have, little bite-sized pieces of information, and then I have, my longer conference talks and things like that, where I do go into more depth, and I'm assuming that people are self-selecting when they choose to go and attend this talk versus, somebody else's talk on a different topic, that they do actually want to learn, these things to a slightly greater depth. Um, where it becomes like really interesting is in documentation, because you want to arm people with enough knowledge to be successful, but to some extent you do have to also get into the weeds and tell them how it works, because there
Yeah.
are plenty of people who want that.
Right.
But balancing documentation between the different sort of goals of people, like people who are there to learn versus people who are there to get a job done versus people who are there to solve a problem. And I had worked for a couple of years in documentation at Okta, and now I have, some domain over documentation at FusionAuth too. And it's a really interesting challenge, um, to kind of provide all of the information someone could want, but in a way that if you don't need it, it's not going to be shoved down your throat. or
Right.
it's not going to be presented in a way that makes you feel like you have to read all this stuff before you can be successful. And it's hard. It's super hard. Like there's plenty of things about FusionAuth's documentation that makes it pretty clear that it's written with the curse of knowledge, like written by people who know these things very deeply and intimately, and they want to share that knowledge, so they want to explain how everything works. But if you're just trying to get a login working and like that's all you want, then if you're finding yourself kind of skipping down the page to not consume, all of the other content on the why and the how, then is that a good developer experience? So documentation is one of those things that's really hard. And I do think that people who are close to documentation or have written documentation have a really good grasp of how hard this is to do, to give people a really good developer experience in docs. And then, people who go and consume docs often and have never written one, just kind of take it for granted that, oh, this information, is available to me and it's great and I have access to this. But so much thought and care and planning and information architecture and all of these things have gone into crafting that documentation. It's something that I hadn't worked in docs before those past 2 years that I was at Okta doing it. And it was really eye-opening for me. I had documentation isn't an area that I would want to just like dedicate my career to and like switch over to.
Yeah.
But having had that experience in kind of being involved in crafting the learning journey for a developer when it comes to the actual docs for a product, I think just has been incredibly helpful for me in DevRel too, to kind of continue to hone in on the differences between, a deep dive and I just need to answer my questions so that I can move on.
Yeah, I can imagine that's hard because like it can also get overwhelming. So like if you wanted to do a bunch of short form pieces and just link out to like, oh, if you want more knowledge, go here. Like even that can still be overwhelming to some degree as a developer if there's like so much of that. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. I used to, when I was working in support prior to becoming an engineer, I used to work on some documentation and it was definitely hard. So I definitely don't know the level of hard that you guys are working with, but I can empathize a little bit. It's a challenge to balance, as you're saying. Um, let's see. Yeah, so I guess on top of your work project, like working on these architecture demos, I know that you do a little bit more of a fun project on the side. Would you like to share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I make miniatures. I make miniatures and artisan keycaps for mechanical keyboards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this is something that, like, ever since I was a little kid, I was like obsessed with dollhouses and stuff like that. So over the COVID period, I had taken to watching little videos on Instagram of people making, these miniature things, and they were using polymer clay. And I was like, oh, I could totally learn to do that. That is actually something that I could do. And I started making miniatures, and then kind of at the same time, I also started getting interested in kind of like keyboard culture, the mechanical keyboards and keycaps and things like that. And I started buying artisan keycaps that were, handmade by people with resin. And
Mm-hmm.
as I was kind of looking at these things, I was like, oh, I make miniatures. I could probably start making keycaps. And kind of one of the interesting things, or sort of, I don't know if it's a parallel exactly, but relationship between like DevRel and teaching and things like that, and getting into these two hobbies, because I basically kind of see the miniature making and the keycaps as two slightly different hobbies, in one
Mm-hmm.
part because the demographics of people who are the artists who do these things can be very different from each other.
Yeah.
One thing that I'd kind of noticed was that people who make miniatures and like jewelry out of polymer clay and things like that are very, very open to sharing exactly how they do everything. So there's tons of, YouTube videos, and there's tons of, Instagram videos and TikToks and things like that where people explicitly demonstrate exactly how they made something.
Yeah.
And you would be hard pressed to find that kind of content for keycap making. It is hard to learn how to make keycaps because nobody wants to share that knowledge.
Yeah.
It is definitely more of like a subset of people who are like, I am, an exclusive artisan of this type of art form, and I'm not going to share how I do it with other people. And that was very interesting to me, like the dichotomy of the communities and the way that they were teaching and learning or communicating with each other was so different that I was really kind of almost shocked, I guess I would say. And one of the things that I started doing was making tutorials on how to make keycaps because they didn't exist.
Yeah.
Or they existed, but people charge money for them. So that was
Right.
the thing, is like some artisans would have a tutorial and be like, yeah, like I have this, how to multicast tutorial or something, and I'll give it to you if you pay me. Whereas, the miniature stuff, it's just everywhere. Anybody can learn how to do it just on a quick Google search.
Well, I was wondering if like if the financial aspect was the big reason for that. Do you think that that's why there is such a big difference? Like people who are doing miniature clay and like miniatures are doing it more for the fun of it. Not to say that people who are doing keycaps aren't having fun, but it is pretty lucrative from what I understand. So is that part of why there's sort of this like holding it close to the chest?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that is part of it. I think there's like, so the keycap or the keyboard community, is largely composed of gamers and
Mm-hmm.
developers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the gamers and developers, you have some stereotypes about them being kind of gatekeepers and being kind of reluctant to let other people into their communities sometimes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that had, something to do with it, but also the artisan keycap community is small enough that people do play it close to the chest. I think it's kind of like you said, like, they want to have a product that people look at and are like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. I could never make that myself. So I'm going to
Yeah.
buy it from you.
It's more desirable then because like I can't do this, but wow, this is beautiful or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to learn to do it myself. Not because I wanted to make money. It is very lucrative though. But not because I wanted to make money or necessarily like sell the stuff that I was doing, but I was seeing these amazing things that other people made, and I spent a ton of time trying to figure out how they did it because nobody would tell me how they did it. Like,
Yeah.
it was all locked behind, there's a lot of private Discord servers and stuff where people kind of talk about it. But again, even in those communities, they still are pretty tight-lipped about like techniques on how to do certain things.
Yeah.
And so teaching myself how to do it was an interesting adventure, and it was just like such a departure from what it was like learning to make miniatures because there's so few resources on how to like cast resin keycaps. So I have several tutorials on making polymer clay keycaps and then also how to cast resin keycaps, because I wanted to open up that knowledge to other people. It's the tutorials that I wished I had when I was trying to figure it out, because it took me so long to figure it out. And there was like one person on YouTube who did actually have like a few tutorials, and it was like that one person, like thank you to that one person who was willing to share that knowledge, that kind of enabled me to figure out some of these things, like how do you convert a paint stirrer into a pressure pot and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. um Stuff that's just, that information isn't readily available, which was interesting. But yeah, like keycaps can sell for like $50 to $100 a piece,
Yeah.
which is
A
kind
one
of
little
insane. Yeah, it's crazy. And yeah, so I sold Keycaps for a while, and then I kind of had reached a point where I realized, although it's very lucrative, the thing about casting keycaps and selling them is that you do the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
And I was getting bored. Like, I didn't want to make 50 of the same keycap. I wanted to make 2 of, 50 different keycaps.
Yeah.
So that's not a great business model, as it turns out. So I have a lot of different sculpts, which, if you look at a lot of the kind of well-known keycap artisans, they don't have a ton of different sculpts. They mainly do like a certain set that they have, and then they cast them in different colorways, or they change them slightly, but it's all derived from the same sculpt or the same set of
Yeah.
sculpts.
That makes
And
sense.
for me, it was like the creation part of designing a sculpt and then figuring out how to make it work as something that sits on a keyboard and that you press a
Mhm.
lot. And it can't break, and it can't be too uncomfortable to use, and it's still got to look good and all these things. It was that process that I actually really enjoyed about it versus I can sell these for, $50 a piece.
Mhm.
So I was doing sales enough that I could sustain the hobby. Like, I had kind of told myself, it's an expensive hobby because a lot of the materials are expensive.
Right.
Like resin is pretty expensive, actually. And then I was like, well, I'm just gonna sell enough that I don't have to use other money to buy materials. So I
Mhm.
sold enough to sustain for a little while, and then I got busy and decided I only wanted to make Keycaps for myself. So that's kind of where I am now. I
I was gonna
haven't
ask if
sold
you.
any in a long time, but I
Yep.
I did realize that I do have a bunch of the same sculpts that I have made many copies of that now I don't. I have hundreds of keycaps that are just sitting in boxes. So, um, I would actually probably like to give some of them away.
Sure.
I'll probably, take some to conferences and stuff like that, and try to give them to
Right.
people. Um, but yeah, it's been, it was a fun learning experience during COVID, to figure out all of these things.
That is one of the more unique COVID projects that I've heard of. So good on you for trying something new. So you mentioned you might want to give them away at conferences one day. Just to kind of bring it back full circle, I was curious to know, like, in DevRel, like, I think of people going to conferences. How often do you actually go to conferences to speak or to be a presence?
So for me personally, I didn't speak at all for the last 2 years when I was at Okta doing documentation. Prior to that, I was kind of a road warrior for a while, and I was speaking like once or twice a month probably, and traveling a lot, traveling a ton. But since I had kind of gotten deeper into like DevRel leadership and strategy, I was doing a little bit less of like the speaking myself, and like folks on my team would go. But at FusionAuth, we have a pretty lean team. So I am getting an opportunity to go out and do things again. So I do a lot of like virtual appearances because, that's still a common thing after COVID, which I actually
Right.
appreciate.
Yeah.
But I will actually be doing a couple of conference talks this fall, which I think will be my first time doing a live on stage talk in like 3 years or something like
What?
that. So I'm pretty excited about it, because I always really enjoyed public speaking, and I've missed it these last few years. So doing getting to talk to people in person, I think, is just, it's so valuable, um, both for me and for the attendees. But
Well, I guess this is probably a good time to start wrapping up. So, if people don't remember anything from this conversation, but they remember one thing, what would you like people to walk away with?
I think probably the most significant part of the conversation was not feeling like you have to know all of the details in order to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes hard to think that you're putting something together and putting it out into the world, but you don't know exactly how it works. But I think that's something that as folks mature as developers, and like software creators, it's just something that is a fact. And there is nothing wrong with knowing enough to be successful without knowing every little tiny minutia of something, and how it works, especially if it's not your main focus. I would say, like, choose to spend your time on the things that you care about and you love, and don't worry about spending a ton of time and energy learning things if they're not something that, is you feel is going to help you and, make you feel fulfilled as a developer, as a creator.
Yeah, that makes sense. It can be hard to remember that, but
Yeah,
but that's good
I
advice.
always have to remind myself.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Kim, so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate you, and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. That's it for this commit of the Work in Progress podcast. If you liked it, please hit follow, leave a review, or share it with another human who's figuring things out too. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and keep showing up, even if it's still a draft. Until next time, keep iterating.